Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Tonight we're back here with Josh Scorcher, and today we got a game list of top 10 hated games that are now loved. So yeah, games that I love now that used to be hated on launch. So I think I could think of a few. There's No Man's Sky that was really trashed on at launch, but now I think it's better. Cyberpunk definitely earns that moniker nowadays, but I think this was before then. Others, don't know. But I get surprised by the list, so how about we hop in and see what games that we now love used to be hated. So be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go. Here we go. Tommy?
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
How well a game ages is an interesting discussion. There are games out there
Some
that
age
receive
like
heaps
fine
of
wine,
praise for
others
being
like rotten
innovative,
cheese.
yet are now seen as outdated. Then there are these games, the kind that weren't appreciated until well after release. Why was a game hated at first? Well, there could be many reasons. Maybe it was too ahead of its time. Maybe it made too many drastic changes to the established formula. Maybe fans were burned from a previous entry and the hate bled over into the new one. How did they become loved? Maybe fans realized they were too harsh. Maybe new fans appreciated them more. Maybe the stories were deeper than we realized at first. Or maybe fans were burned from a recent entry and wanted to look back on the good stuff. As for how to rank these entries, there are a few factors. For one thing, how long did it take for fans to come around? How big was the disconnect between people hating the game and people loving it? How much does it make you go, wait, people actually hated this game? Whatever the case, these are the top 10 hated games that people now love.
Bring it. First up, number 10.
The Halo franchise left a permanent mark on gaming history with its numerous innovations that are now industry standard. Rebounding / regenerative health, popularizing console online play, custom maps, and game modes. Now that there's not much left to innovate in terms of gameplay, mostly what Halo games do nowadays is up the graphics and try telling a good story. Whether they succeed on that last one depends on who you ask. Of course, don't expect them to hold on to that opinion forever. To really put this in perspective, I'd like to take a number from this meme. 2007, simply fantastic, pinnacle of the series. It has been downhill ever since. In retrospect, it wasn't as bad as originally thought. It had some great ideas and executed them well enough. Screw this game. The multiplayer's broken and the campaign is crap. Rip Halo. 3 years later. Simply fantastic, pinnacle of the series has been downhill ever since. In retrospect, it wasn't as bad as originally thought. It had some great ideas and executed them well enough. Screw this game. The multiplayer is broken and the campaign is crap. Rip Halo. 3 years later.
Fantastic,
pinnacle of the series has been downhill ever since. In retrospect, it wasn't as bad as originally thought. It had some great ideas and executed them well enough. Screw this game.
Oh God.
See the pattern yet? The Halo franchise seems to be stuck in a loop when it comes to making new games. 1 minute a title comes out and it's called hot garbage. And then a few years later, another title comes out and what used to be the franchise killer is suddenly either not so bad or the best game in the series ever. For example, Halo 4 was originally seen as the overhyped, least popular title thanks to its more casual gameplay. It also didn't help that there was a developer ship between Reach and 4, which really didn't leave a good impression.
Yeah, that was kind of the jumping off point for me.
People began humming its praises for the emotional depth given to normally stoic characters and recognizing the campaign's fun missions. Plus, it was a lot better than Destiny at the time. Then Halo 3 ODST came out and was shrugged off as just an extension of Halo 3 and not worth the money, before praising its atmosphere, characters, and story upon its re-release on Steam. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind on something. Opinions are supposed to change and evolve. But my point is, this keeps happening. So when do you call it out? The Halo franchise has always had a contentious life cycle. It was either really, really loved or really, really hated. Most of the hate coming from because the series was popular. No matter what, if you were a gamer circa 2002 to 2015, you had to have an opinion on Halo. And it was not allowed to be neutral or ambivalent. You either had to think it was the second coming or the rapture. No agnostics in this house.
It's video game politics. Just
Sounds
like
right.
real politics.
Politics.
Kind of funny how we're allowed to change our minds on certain Halo games, but society forces you to pick whether you fully love or hate the franchise itself.
I was kind of neutral, to be honest.
We're all kind of guilty.
I didn't
of this
really play it for a while.
I've stupidly hated on games for petty reasons, whether they were just different from what I was used to, or I couldn't play them and I was deluding myself out of envy. Yeah, young me, I didn't want it anyway. I'm taking my ball and going home. So yeah, the love-hate mess alone is the reason why this is at the bottom of the list.
I might have to retry Halo 4. Let's see if we can get that game.
Imagine hating a Kirby game. No, really, that was a thing at some point.
As far as Nintendo titles go, the Kirby series rarely sticks to a formula. Well, recently anyway. Since the beginning, the real thing that's made a Kirby game what it was using enemies against themselves, whether by inhaling and shooting them out, copy abilities, etc. Heck, the theme song of the TV show spells it out.
Right back at ya.
Because of that, there's a plethora of unique games to be found in this series to execute this idea, whether it's a diamond in the rough or a classical black sheep. Epic Yarn falls more into the latter. This is Nintendo's first take on the arts and crafts style platformers before the baton was passed on to Yoshi. And for what it is, it's a pretty well-made game, with great visuals, soothing soundtrack, and colorful, creative stages.
I mean, it doesn't look that bad.
Not the DLC art direction becoming an integral part of the gameplay, but this game really puts the yarn and fabric aesthetics to great use in its level designs. Not to mention, it's just way too adorable. If you're looking to relax, this game's got a lot of ways to melt your heart.
You have no heart.
So, why did people hate this game again? Oh yeah, this came out at a time when people only wanted hardcore. Unfortunately, back then, people's scope for what games should be were kind of limited, and weirdly, Kirby fans were no exception. Knowing that you can't die in this game turns off quite a number of people because the general consensus is that death was the sole risk for challenge.
And how is the game even hard? What's the point if you can just play forever?
Sure, if you play the game while turning off your brain, you can get through everything without even trying. But there's more to that. Epic Yarn encourages you to play like a completionist, meaning collecting a lot of beads, not getting hit too much, and clearing stages with the highest possible scores. And believe me, those are much, much harder to do than it sounds. Besides, death isn't even a foolproof method of challenge, given how some games have used it as a progress saver, especially in speedruns. There's nothing wrong with a game that tries a different scope with its gameplay, and Epic Yarn proves that. A game can be pretty and comfy and still really well done. Nice to see more and more people are growing to appreciate that over time, since games that do this sort of thing have become more common nowadays and even became staples in the indie market. Let's hope it stays that way, because therapeutic games like these do deserve that recognition.
True. Most people can use those nowadays, too. Be nice. Alright?
The original Ace Attorney trilogy has been regarded as a commendable classic, even before its localization. The story of Phoenix Wright and his rise to glory has become a quintessential component that made the series as meaningful as it is. So when an installment in the series comes out to continue that legacy, fans weren't sure what to expect. The main character is different, and everything takes place years in the future. But hey, knowing that Phoenix is in the game, that should have garnered back the interest of old fans, right?
Problem with that.
Let's see that initial reaction.
Oh. Yeesh.
Yep, Apollo's debut game was not very smiled upon, and a lot of that came down to how they handled his more beloved precursor. Phoenix, whom we used to know as a virtuous attorney fighting for truth and justice, is now a deadbeat who lost his badge, holds custody of a girl claiming to be his daughter, gets into fights in pubs, and cheats both during poker and in court. Not to mention he's kind of a cold jerk, barely reacting to physical trauma and shrugging over dire situations while giving crummy advice.
Insert Last Jedi joke here. I'm getting tired of picking on it.
It's pretty obvious why people were quick to turn away from this game, given how sharp of a turn it took from what old fans were familiar with in the series. There's a lot of gimmicky moments like this as well. Hit and miss minigames, nonsensical time travel, and the questionable introduction to the jury system that didn't see future use in the chronological timeline. That said, if you're willing to look past all that, Apollo Justice is still, by essence, a good Ace Attorney game. It still maintains all the elements that made these games so great. The mysteries are wacky and fun, the characters are unique and well developed, and it still has that quintessential music and visual style we familiarize with and enjoy. It certainly took the fans a while to welcome this game into the lineup, but at some point, they did. The games have been given a lot more tribute in recent times, with praises given to how ambitious it is, despite the hiccups it had to go through to get there. History tends to repeat itself with more modern games in the series, seeing criticism for opposite reasons, mainly due to the community being generally split about the direction the series took. Regardless, that doesn't change the fact that these games, for most of the time, know how to nail that good old Ace Attorney vibe. No matter how badly a game in the series could see itself be pelted, as long as it still has interesting mysteries and great characters, there's always something there for fans to look back to and appreciate.
I mean, you ain't wrong, but actually, the whole, thing you remember when why he lost his badge, you'd be surprised. Okay, so a little spoilers ahead, but yeah, it turns out Phoenix got played by one of his clients, I want to say. But anyway, he got tricked into presenting forged evidence in one of the cases. His client just up and vanishes. So because of that, he lost his badge. So that's why he became what he was in Apollo. But luckily, thanks to him and Trucy, they managed to get him back on the right track. And, well, by the time of Dual Destinies, they got their badge back. So, in a way, it was kind of a dark time for Phoenix, because, again, he had no job. His only chance was, the gambling circuit. He had to support Trucy. So, when in doubt, just scam his way through. Again, Phoenix was in a dark place, considering he lost the only job he only had. He ever had, you get me? But, anywho, yeah. And luckily, people now appreciate Apollo for what he gave them. We actually do have Athena to thank for that. Considering chemistry between the two. Very nice. Anyway, so I'm not sure if I'm not sure when the next, new game in the timeline is going to come out, considering Spirit Justice, but it'd be kind of cool to hang out with Athena again. Or no, who knows? We gotta get a, recurrent appearance from Apollo again. Who knows? I'm actually kind of curious to see what's next in the franchise after, the Greatest Attorney Chronicles. Like I said, I'm really curious about what happens next, Well, anyway, we'll be moving on. Number 7, please.
It's no secret that Mega Man has had some great games over the years, and some not so great games. This is true of most long-running franchises, but when Mega Man stinks, it really stinks. Enough so that people outright ignore the follow-ups, even if they're good or even great games in their own right. This phenomenon happened twice in slightly different forms, so I wanted to talk about both of them. Mega Man X8 and Mega Man Star Force. For anyone who's been around, Mega Man X7 has a legendary reputation for being awful. So bad, in fact, that some people even swore off Mega Man entirely, which is a shame because X8 ended up being pretty darn good. The combat was snappier, the movement didn't feel like you were moving through molasses, got rid of those abysmal 3D segments, and there was one other thing. What was it? Oh yeah, you didn't have to unlock X. Thankfully, people eventually gave Mega Man X8 a shot, and it took its rightful place as a fan favorite. A Mega Man series that wasn't quite so lucky, even if its fans are very dedicated, is Mega Man Star Force. Star Force is a direct sequel series to the Mega Man Battle Network series, which in this case is more of a burden than a boon. Battle Network burned players in a different way than to X7. It caused burnout. Battle Network had 6 mainline games and 3 side games, enough to make Kingdom Hearts blush, and most people agree Battle Network overstayed its welcome hard. So it comes as little surprise when a sequel series was announced, people thought it was going to be more of the same and gave it a pass, which was a kind way of saying people were so sick of Battle Network they avoided Star Force like the plague. After that, Star Force and Battle Network both just kind of faded into the back of public consciousness. Fortunately, a small but extremely loyal fan base eventually grew up around Star Force, and I am not being held hostage by one of them to spread the good word. Not at all.
Fair enough. I mean, hey, I'm not holding them hostage. I'm good. But yeah, even I played the games. That was my first Mega Man game outside of,
Paper Mario is fondly regarded as a classic. The simple yet effective combat, likable characters, and charming art style made it an instant hit.
Right?
Passing
Super
your
Mario?
door was even better,
Super Paper Mario?
everything that made the original great and pushing it to the next level. With this in mind, it's no wonder why Super Paper Mario was so divisive upon release. Right off the bat, the art style was massively changed. This, alongside the lack of typical Mario NPCs, made it feel less familiar compared to the previous two. To say nothing of the changes to the gameplay, in a massive departure from the previous entries, Super Paper Mario was primarily a platformer with some light RPG elements. While the game certainly had some fans, they were few and far between. So what happened to make people change their minds? Sticker Star happened.
Sticker Star?
Just about everything that made the previous games great was completely gone. The combat was dumbed down to insultingly simple levels, and the environments were incredibly bland. Most damningly, the story and characters were paper thin.
Literally.
I can't get mad at this pun because it's not an exaggeration.
This made people take a look back at Super and learn to appreciate it for its own merits. The gameplay, while undeniably different, is still fun in its own right, but what really got fans to change their mind was the story. In addition to likable characters and humor, you had an excellent group of villains and a plot that was willing to get incredibly dark. While it's still not everyone's cup of tea, it's far easier to find fans of Super Paper Mario than Sticker Star nowadays.
You know what's bad when the best thing I could say about Sticker Star was that it made people hate Super Paper Mario less.
Yeah, that's bad when it makes the previous entry look good.
Sonic has had some turbulence over the last, 20 or so years. Ever since Adventure 2,
ups,
Sonic
downs,
game
all
quality has
around.
gone more up and down than a temperature chart in New England.
So,
but was Sonic Adventure
who
2
got
the
luck
last
now?
real good Sonic game? I'd say no. The 2D Sonic games that have been coming out have been incredible, with some exceptions. Sonic
I think I
Advance,
can guess
Sonic
from the
Rush,
music, Sonic Heroes.
Mania, and Sonic 4 have all been great games with exceptional reviews. The 3D Sonic games have had more trouble.
Not so much.
Sonic Colors and Generations were both good, excluding the remaster of the former. But were there any
Ouch.
other 3D Sonic games that are worthy of being considered good by fans? Well, I can think of two: Sonic Heroes and Unleashed. Before I get to the werehog-sized hole in the wall that I just caused, let's talk Heroes. When it first came out, people didn't like it because it didn't have the exploration or story beats that Adventure had coined. 12 playable characters separated into 4 different teams is a great concept, but then you have those 4 teams each go through the same zones. Sure, those zones are altered depending on the team, but it still felt like a downgrade from Adventure. Despite that, I think Heroes is still a fun game with great stage design, fun gameplay, and a decent enough story, with Metal Sonic taking focus for the first time since CD. Unfortunately, since it was the main follow-up after Adventure 2, everyone compared it to that. Luckily, with its follow-ups being Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06, Heroes came back up in people's opinion. Too bad it never got a PC port, unlike Sonic Lost World for some reason. And then we have Sonic
never gonna let that one go.
Unleashed. Okay, have you guys played this game? I mean, recently.
Yeah, the whole
Was the game
poor man's
really
beat up?
that bad? Yes, the werehog stages were slow and a massive departure from the day stages, but they were still functional. It was Baby's first beat 'em up, and it really wasn't that bad. And with the night stages being okay, the day stages were phenomenal.
Woo-hoo!
This felt like the fastest Sonic has ever felt, and the actual stage designs were amazing. Story was pretty cool too, seeing what was supposed to be Sonic and Eggman's last battle, only for Eggman to turn it on its head at the last second and literally split the world in 7 parts. That's insane. Yes, we got the werehog out of it, but you really need to take off the werehog blinders and see this game for what it is: a functional and decent Sonic game. Though this game never got ported either and could only be played on modern consoles via Xbox, I really hope they port this game one day. Just do it correctly. Unlike Colors,
Please,
and probably
Sega.
replace the Xbox and PS3 final boss with the Wii and PS2 one, as I don't want to button mash the Y button 60 times in 30 seconds ever again. I won't say that Heroes or Unleashed were masterpieces. Honestly, Adventure 2 wasn't either, nor was Colors or Generations. But I feel like all of those games can
not all
still
of
be
them are
considered part of
masterpieces.
the good 3D Sonic game side of the coin. They still did a lot of great things that people loved in more popular Sonic games, and people are starting to realize that now more and more. Sure, like almost every other entry on this list, it was because worse games came out after, but if that's what it takes sometimes for people to appreciate games that deserve it, then I don't mind slogging through a Sonic Boom or two to get there.
Fair, but I don't think companies companies need to rely on that, you know?
You may have noticed that a
Kinda
lot of
bad.
entries on this list are more recent games, as in games released after 2010. That's because, let's face it, it's a lot easier to gauge the collective fandom opinions nowadays thanks to social media. It's both a blessing and a curse. A blurse, if you will. Not that collective fandom opinions weren't around back in the day. There was always message boards and forums, but only the most hardcore of gamers used them to share their opinions. Only the loudest and most passionate get their thoughts put front and
I'd like to know
center.
where this is
and
going.
that really hasn't changed much today.
Oh yeah? Well, I speak loud, and I carry a bigger stick, and I use it too.
For better or worse. The only thing that's really different is the numbers. Why do I bring this up? Because good evidence for this entry was really hard to come by because so many message boards have been lost to internet history. Still, we had to try because I remember the surprising backlash that Metroid Fusion got.
I'll give you a second to find your socks that just blew off.
You're lying!
I wish
Pretty
I was
much.
lying, but yep. Metroid Fusion, the fourth title in the franchise. After an 8-year gap between it and Super Metroid, the chapter that brought us the terrifying SAX didn't impress gamers when it first came out. But why? It had a great soundtrack, the graphics and atmosphere were really nice, the controls were tight, it gave Samus some much needed characterization. Oh wait, I think I know what the problem was.
I don't like change!
Yeah,
Thank you,
unfortunately,
Julie.
fans of anything can be pretty adverse to change. So imagine how they felt when they saw such blasphemy in a Metroid game. Having clear objectives and direction, a stronger focus on the story, difficulty, it was unheard of. Of course, what really didn't help was that around the same time, Metroid Prime came out and fans gravitated more towards it with the traditional breadcrumb style progression, kinder difficulty curve, and it was in 3D, and a first-person shooter. Maybe you heard of some of them, they weren't really common at the time. Thankfully, such rejection didn't last very long, and now you can't browse YouTube without tripping over a Metroid Fusion video essay written by some loser millennial. Yeah, I've said countless times how much I love Metroid Fusion, so it does my heart good to see people give it the appreciation it deserves. Of course, what really helped shoot up Fusion's popularity was when the hate target was placed on another Metroid game's back, one that actually deserved it, Other M. People with fond memories of Samus's characterization in Fusion, as well as the iconic line, "Any objections, lady?" were excited to see a stronger delve into Samus's personality. So, to see Samus's character come off in such a bastardized way was a huge letdown.
Did I ever mention how much I hated Other M?
This Samus will not stop talking. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, wow, that sounds like a really bad idea for a game mechanic. Usually had no idea what the f you were looking for. Adam comes across as a complete a-hole, and it looks like Samus just rolls over and takes his unnecessary harshness because, why? What the f is wrong with you, you stupid excuse for a melting?
You good?
I mentioned it once or twice at some point.
So, naturally, people are going to look back more fondly on the game that did the most contentious part better and completely ignore all other complaints they may have had.
Yeah, that's kind of sad. And actually, it's kind of ironic too, because the stuff you see in Fusion that people hated back then was actually in Dread, because, yeah, people liked that one more than they did Fusion back then. Kind of ironic. Like, yeah, like, difficult enemies, like the enemy bots, that you had to get like a specific weapon to destroy, clear objectives, like the personalization, like you see that in Dread, and yet people hated it when it was in Fusion. The hell? Yeesh. That's rough, isn't it? Anyway, moving along, we're down to the final three actually. Let's go.
Fallout 3 was a game changer upon release. Thanks to the innovative VATS system, it perfectly bridged the gap between RPG and FPS. So when New Vegas was announced, fans were hyped for how it could move the series forward. The initial reaction to New Vegas was okay. While not exactly hated per se, many fans and critics saw it as more of a glorified expansion to Fallout 3 than an actual sequel. It didn't help that the technical state was a mess, which can be blamed on the rushed development cycle. Nowadays, New Vegas is considered by many to be the best game in the series. Why is this? Well, a lot of it comes to the story. New Vegas was developed by Obsidian, with the dev team consisting of key members from the original 2 Fallouts. This made it feel way more like a true successor to them than 3 was. Right off the bat, your player character has far less of a defined backstory. You're not on some epic quest to find your father or son. You're just a rando trying to find the guy that shot you. This made it far easier to be who you wanted and, roleplay in this role-playing game franchise. In terms of morality, there was no explicit good or evil faction. Do you side with the NCR and try to bring the Wasteland back to pre-war glory? Do you side with Mr. House and try to usher in a new era? Do you side with the Legion and rule through sheer brutality? Or do you reject all of them and start your own ideology? It's up to you. There's no true ending. But what really made people reevaluate New Vegas was Fallout 4. While the combat and visuals were definitely a step up, the RPG mechanics took a major hit. The dialogue and skill systems were oversimplified, which made it harder to make unique character builds. The new factions tried to match the depth of New Vegas, but just came off as pale imitations. Quests had significantly fewer ways to resolve them, which led to far less replay value. With the benefit of hindsight, New Vegas is seen by a growing number of players as the perfect blend of old school and modern Fallout.
Let me put it to you this way. If you want to start a flame war, go to 4chan and say you don't like Fallout New Vegas.
Are you sure you want that? I don't want B after me, thank you. Man, I don't know what they do.
The Nintendo GameCube. True, it wasn't much to look at and kind of lacked in terms of features, though its controller and expansive quality library more than made up for its plainness, and it's become one of the most fondly remembered consoles in Nintendo's history. However, did you know that some of its most iconic titles weren't as well received as they are now?
Okay, you're lying. What makes you lie?
Yep, when they first came out, a lot of the GameCube's most notable titles were kinda shrugged off for one reason or another, kinda like the console itself. Take, for example, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. It really came out at a bad time. Again, this was the age where gamers wanted a hardcore game with plenty of edgy, not some cartoony kitty crap. Funny enough, it was these complaints that actually inspired Twilight Princess, unquestionably one of the darkest titles in the Zelda franchise. So I guess some good came out of the complaints. Thankfully, however, a lot of fans look back at Wind Waker fondly, saying how the cell shading aged beautifully and the story had a fun, relaxing atmosphere. Guess it was just the calm before that. Then there's Animal Crossing. At the time, kids were all like, ew, real life? Who wants to play a life simulator? But as adults, now we're like, ew, real life. Let me escape to the cutesy refuge of my real life. I don't care how on the nose it is, it's still super cute. And considering how popular the franchise is now, the rest is history. Then there are games that dared to break the mold of their traditional style, and it didn't really land well at first. Take, for example, Super Mario Sunshine. People hated it because of the wonky voice acting, and the gameplay was based more on the jetpack rather than the traditional platformer jumping from thing to thing. The lack of serious iconography like Goombas and Koopas didn't help either. Nowadays, it's more loved because of the unique setting and puzzles that feel a lot more novel. It's kind of funny, Mario games of this day and age are criticized for being less innovative and more repetitive, and yet, when they tried something new with Sunshine, people hated it. You really can't win. Speaking of, the same mindset kinda applied to Luigi's Mansion.
I'm not scared. That game was just awful. Even Luigi didn't like it. No, it was a GameCube. All of those games were terrible.
Jeez, poor Luigi. He finally gets a game all to himself where he's the big hero instead of just the scaredy cat brother. And it got panned when it first came out because it wasn't a platformer and was too short for players' likings. Thankfully, years later, people have changed their tune once they learned to appreciate the unique gameplay, great world building and atmosphere, and how much it developed Luigi. It ended up becoming an underrated classic, but it still spawned two sequels for the 3DS and Switch. It just goes to show that sometimes you never appreciate something until it's gone. In this case, the GameCube and its really underrated library. Sometimes people don't actually know what they want in the moment.
Yeah, Steve Jobs, one of his favorite quotes. And the honorable mentions?
Among Us was never really hated when it launched, but it didn't blow up into a meme until 2 years after it was released. Metal Gear Solid 2, all the romance was annoying, meta-commentary was very ahead of its time. Resident Evil 5, you really think about it, it's almost exactly like RE4 and people are beginning to take notice. Arkham Origins, the only title in the franchise not developed by Rocksteady, and yet it did what the other Arkham games couldn't do. make Bane look like a legitimate threat. Vanquish came out at a time oversaturated with third-person cover shooters. Silent Hill Shattered Memories was more psychological than the usual series grotesque, and Homecoming and Origins left a bad taste in fans' mouths. Street Fighter 3, there's a 3? Yeah, while it did remove some big characters, it made some huge leaps forward technical-wise. Earthbound. At the time? Nowadays?
If God had a favorite game, it might be Earthbound.
Final Fantasy XII. The disaffected middle child between 10 and 13 was a bit too menu grindy and micromanagey than fans had expected at the time. Final Fantasy IX.
If I had a nickel for every formerly hated installment in a fantasy franchise that featured a sudden shift to a cartoony art style, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Right?
Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. How dare a Fire Emblem game be easy or accessible? I'm noticing a pattern with this series.
Always gotta hate on the new guys. And number one.
Over the last few years have been pretty hit or miss depending on who you ask. With all the controversy surrounding Sword and Shield, Pokemon's opinions of the series
wait till Scarlet and Violet, my friend.
I want to burn Pokemon to the ground with a Charizard. It didn't begin with Sword and Shield, though. All those games did was throw gasoline on a passive flame that's been lit since probably Generation 3. Similar to the Halo franchise, Pokemon goes through cycles of the newest games are terrible and the best games were 2 or 3 iterations ago. I don't know if people still use this word, but back in the day, we had a term Gen 1ers to describe fans who despised anything that wasn't the original 151. Yeah, I've been around the block, and I've seen hate for generations of Pokemon that are considered untouchable now. Remember when Fawful's Minion got so much hate for putting Generation 4 as the best gen and Generation 1 as the worst? Josh Scorcher remembers. I remember when people hated Generation 4. 4! Why did many people believe that 4 was the harbinger of doom for the franchise? Mostly because of frickin' Bidoof. No, seriously, Gen 4's slow pacing was a secondary gripe from the fan base. I think this phenomenon happens because each new generation contains a design choice that doesn't perform well, that 2 or 3 generations ago was probably the best it's been. Gen 6 was hated for its dumb story and lackluster rivals, and previous games had some of the best ones. So we see Gen 7 try to recoup with better storytelling and more dynamic villains and rivals. Oh, but I'm forgetting about the time that Gen 7 was the worst that Pokemon has ever been because it was too hand-holdy for fans at the start. But nowadays, it's praised for the amount of technical improvements it's added compared to Gen 8, like IV tracking and, the removal of HMs. I could go on, but as you've gathered from the rest of this list, when gamers see issues with the current games that are coming out in a series they like, they'll go back to previous games in the series to experience the rose-tinted good old times. As a longtime Pokemon fan, it's often frustrating that the fan base often hyper-focuses on what each generation didn't do well rather than the things they did do well that are now franchise staples. Gen 2 gave us held items and more involved gym leaders. 3 gave us double battles and abilities. 4 gave us the physical special split and the TARDIS bag. 5 gave us reusable TMs and a dynamic camera. 6 gave us a customizable appearance and mega evolutions. 7 gave us regional variants and killed HMs for good. And given the hype for Legends Arceus, I'm pretty sure we're going to look back pretty fondly on Gen 8's wild area. And that's not going into the sporadic improvements throughout, such as new evolutions, typing, and balancing. Which brings me to what I consider to be the #1 most hated generation that people now love. Black and White. People really didn't like this at first because of a few issues. The map was very linear for one. There was no returning Pokemon from previous games until post-game, only new ones. And some Pokemon designs were lazy to very annoying degrees. And yes, I'm talking about the ice cream cone, the literal snowflake, and a garbage bag. And even other new designs felt like alterations of previous Pokemon, Machop to Timber for one. And the story was different. It went to more realistic norms with the PETA-like enemy team and the idealistic leader. All of these add up to a mess that led people to really dislike Gen 5. And then Gen 6 came out, and then suddenly Black and White became the shining examples of Pokemon the world over. Sure, the map was linear, but the post-game was plentiful. For every lazy Pokemon design like Clink and Vanillite, you got cool ones like Bisharp and Axegor. Plus, it's not like older generations were innocent of lazy designs. Yes, I'm talking about the Pokeballs with eyes. and people came around to prefer the grittier and challenging story to the obvious and gaudy one in Gen 6. And then Sword and Shield came out, and holy moly, the love for Black and White utterly skyrocketed. Not unfoundedly, Sword and Shield had easily the worst villain teams we've seen in a while, so naturally, people are going back to look more fondly at the games where we had the best ones. And when you look at all of this, it's easy to see how Black and White went from two games that everyone didn't like to the shining example of what Pokemon games should be. I do have my own nitpicks about Black and White, of course. I don't think the games are perfect, nor do they do things better than modern Pokemon games in some ways. Plus, the ending with Getsus and the only new Pokemon thing still leave fans divided. But it's kind of hard to ignore that Black, White, Black 2, and White 2 are a really cohesive package when it comes to Pokemon games.
The movie stuff
and even
Black
if they
and White
shouldn't be
2 was
striving to
interesting.
replicate Gen 5 exactly, Game Freak has shown us each generation that they can knock some aspect of a Pokemon game out of the park that fans will look fondly back on.
I'm Fiery Joker, and at the time of this recording, Pokemon Arceus is not out yet, so please be good, 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 please be good!
God.
Well, luckily for you, Josh, it is. And Scarlet Violet, you're But yeah, again, you think Pokemon would give it at least a year or two before they do it again. Or maybe 2 to 3 years at least. Eesh. Oh boy. Really goes to show you, really gotta be careful how much you do. So for now, I think that's gonna be it for me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, like, subscribe for more. See ya.